Hey guys, I know it's been a while, but I'm here today to share with you something that's really exciting. I've never fully understood how to wield watercolor in a way that felt comfortable to me. I wanted it to always be mixed media, but it always felt like it was a fine art medium to me. So I've really taken it upon myself. I want to play with watercolor and use it in some mixed media ways, and I am having the time of my life. And I want to share it with you. So, if you were around a couple weeks ago, you saw that from Art Philosophy, a Prima owned company, they sent me, and for lack of a better term, a shitload of all of their watercolor products for me to play and explore and to get comfortable with. And I am using their Terrain. That's the name of this palette. And it's a combination of greens and blues and oranges and a little purples and red. And I'm gonna work with this palette exclusively. And I figure what better way than to use kind of an assorted a grouping of colors that are already pre-made to kind of get my feet wet and get my skin in the game, so to speak, as I play with these colors. So each one of the palettes that they have comes with this like color key. And so I decide, let me play with the color key so I know exactly what colors are in this palette. So that's what you see me doing here. And I have to say, as a floral painter or someone that really likes florals, I found this palette really serving. Like it has the greens, it has oranges and reds and purples and a little bit of blue, so it has everything. All right. So I sent my son out a couple weeks ago to get me some absorbent ground, and they didn't have it. And he came back with this absorbent ground from Danielle Smith, and I love it. It basically turns a paper into a watercolor paper, and I'm using my favorite journal in the whole world, these Stillman and Burn journals. This is a small one, brand new journal. Figured I'd throw it all in today and started a new journal because I like to hoard these and not really use them. And I'm taping the edges. I'm not sure if I needed to, but I really like the satisfaction of pulling the tape back when I'm done. It has this nice clean edge. And I play around with trying to break it up into a grid, and then I decide no. I've done the whole grid thing before in bigger journals and I loved it. And I'm like, I have 3 by 5 inches of space here. That's not enough space to play in. So I decided to tape off both sides of the pages. Again, I'm not even sure at this point that I needed to do that, but it sure is fun to pull back the tape. So I went for it. I do like the nice crisp edge at the end. So you see me putting that Daniel Smith ground. Again, I really love Golden's absorbent ground, but my Michaels didn't have it. And I got the more expensive version of it because that was all they had. All right, so I don't know a lot about watercolor, but what I do know is you want to go in with light color first and build up your darkness. Now, again, this is the opposite of everything I love about acrylic and oil, so I am really just going with it and trying to channel the idea of learning and newness. So this brush here is a Princeton Neptune brush. I love this brush. It feels kind of organic in its like hairs and the way it lays down color. Like that brush itself does that petal work for me, but you can use any watercolor brush. And again, I will put all of these links in my Patreon post. So if you are watching this over on YouTube, I'll throw the link to Patreon in the description, and you can either rewatch this video over there or also take advantage of all the product links, and this way you'll have all that information. So like I said, I'm going into this blind. I would consider this kind of like this art journal thing where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to make, but I've got watercolor. Let's see what we can do. And so I decide, all right, I'll do this kind of warmer palette on the right, and then I'll work with this kind of green, traditional maybe color palette on the left if I was doing a fern. So I'm going to be way upfront with you and honest. I have the patience of nothing. I love what watercolor does. I don't have the patience to wait for it to dry. So I'm going to say this is the hardest part of using watercolor for me, is the patience to stop and let it dry. Because I know when you work in layers, it works out so much more beautifully in watercolor. It's a practice in patience. And this is good, right? We should all practice the things that we're the weakest in. But as you see me going through here, really having that sample of the colors, above me is a really good help. Normally I would just fly by the seat of my pants and just wing it and go for it. But I really like having that reference because there are some greens in here that are more blue than they are yellow or green ish in tone. And I'm really kind of using that to my advantage when I start color mixing. And those of you that have been color mixing with me in acrylic, that is important in watercolor, in oil, acrylic, all the medias. So I'm utilizing that as I'm playing in this journal. And here's case in point. I'm kind of mixing to get this turquoise-ish kind of blend of blue, that kind of traditional color blue, or that, like, I don't know, it's like a country blue. It's not necessarily like a green base blue to me. I want to make it a little bit more greener, and so I'm just mixing in some of those colors. Some of this is, I don't even know why I'm saying some, all of this is just playing and experimenting, and I'm loving the freedom to do that. I think it's always a little bit more freeing to work in a journal. It's less freeing to work in a brand new journal. And I did skip the first page because that always makes me feel better working in a journal if I skip a page and don't open to the first thing that I've done in there and see it all the time. But this is how we learn. And if anything you walk away from here, even if you're not playing in watercolor, maybe you're playing in acrylic, or maybe you're just watching and you could care less about painting in watercolor, just the idea of the practice, taking it all in, taking a moment to just kind of lose all the expectations that you have about yourself and just dive into playing like a child would and experimenting. We learn much more from our mistakes than we will ever learn from our successes. And we need to try to make as many mistakes in this creative play as we can. Because the real lesson is not making it perfect or even making the mistakes. It's, can you fix it? Do you own the power to fix it? And I say yes. And that's where a lot of my confidence comes from, is I have made so many freaking mistakes that I now own the superpower of getting a mistake and taking it to the next phase of acceptance, or where I can say, great, I pulled it out of that one. I think Inspiration Wednesday did a lot of that for me. But, as I've kind of matured and tried other medias and maybe even got a little bit into painting portraits and things like that, there's always going to be a mistake. There's no way you can be perfect all the time. So you got to kind of embrace it or use it to your advantage. And that's kind of what this is. Again, I'm playing with color. I want to use the full extension of this palette, meaning I want my brush to touch every color in this palette, and I do. Now, whether I love the color or not is inconsequential. I know I need to build value. Value is the most important thing you can build in your artwork, whether it is mixed media, collage, watercolor, acrylic, oil. Color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. And you're going to see this start to build depth as we use lighter colors and darker colors. And for those of you that are like, what the hell does value mean? I forget. Value is the intensity of a color. So the lightness or the darkness. If you think of a grayscale, white is the lightest value and black is the darkest value, and the different grays in between are how the value scale gets from lightest to darkest. And so you want to use all the spaces in between. If you just use white and just use black, it's going to seem very flat. You've got to use a couple different variations of lighter and darker shades of gray in order to get this to work, and that applies to color. It doesn't matter what color you use. Blue, purple, green, red, doesn't matter. You need to have darks, you need to have lights, and you need to have several of the values in between in order to make it interesting. And this is an experiment in value. Can I get the value I want? Can I zhuzh it? Now, I will tell you kind of a short story here as you're watching this, just as a side note. I, for a long time, and I'm still not sure how I feel about watercolor, but I want to use it. I want to wield it. I love what it does. Anyway, I took a watercolor class in downtown Charlotte with a rather esteemed watercolor artist. And I ended up leaving it really pissed off and forever angry with watercolor and anybody who did it, because the teacher must have known who I was. This was years ago. And as I was painting, I paint with watercolor like an acrylic artist. Not gonna lie, if you're a watercolor painter and you're watching me do this, it's probably pissing you off, just like it did that woman, because I paint like an acrylic artist in watercolor. And I say, if that's what I want to do, then that's what I'm gonna freaking do. But I guess she was trying to teach me, and I was painting a magnolia, and magnolias are white, and any traditional watercolorist will tell you you don't paint white. You leave the white space, leave the paper, and you paint around it. So like you kind of negative space paint. Well, I thought I paid to take a painting class, and I like to paint, and I want to dip my brush in paint, and I made my magnolia pink. Well, that pissed her off. And yeah, she said, I know you are, and if you tend to paint like an acrylic artist in this class, you might as well leave. So I packed my shit up and I left because I was so pissed off that that woman had the audacity to tell me I was doing it wrong. And I will never tell a student they're doing it wrong. I will only just listen and see what they're doing because it might change the way you do things. But yeah, that threw me off watercolor, and I think that's why I was a hater for a while. But I really love, well, here's the other thing. Art media is art media, and the more things I can wield, the more power I feel like is in my bag of tricks and my file cabinet of knowledge. And I don't want to be the kind of person, artist that says, I don't like it because. I guess I want to find a reason, but I don't really hate it. I just haven't found, or haven't maybe allowed, that's probably the better thing, the playing of watercolor to fit into what I love about media. And that's the other takeaway here. You know, screw what anybody says about how you're supposed to paint. Figure out how you and the media come together to understand each other. And that's what I'm doing with this. Yes, I paint in watercolor like an acrylic artist. I probably paint in acrylic like an oil artist. There's a million crossovers to what I do because I'm just me. And this is how I like to experiment with media. And so I'm just going to keep playing. Again, one thing I know for certain is you have to work value. And that's what you see me working lighter to dark. And I want to play with the transitions of colors. I want to use the wetness. I'm an acrylic painter and oil painter that loves working wet in wet. I know that can be an utter catastrophe in watercolor. So there's figuring out that fine line as well. When the paint starts to meld together, do I like it? For example, there's a red, purple hodgepodge of a mess happening at the right side over here, and I'm allowing that because I know full well I've got Prismacolors waiting for me just off camera, and I like the idea of this zhuzh, I'm going to call it zhuzh, where it's not defined, and then I get to take a different media, a pencil, which is a line and a marking media, and play with the contrast of zhuzh and line. This is exciting to me. This is where me and watercolor meet. This is the happy place. This is the mixed media artist at work figuring out how changing up the medias communicate the sentiment that you want. And that is the key to success. Throwing what everybody says out the window and doing what the hell you feels right. And so I really love this terrain palette, but I also love that the palette itself sets me up for success. And even the way it's laid out, all of these palettes are numbered. So I put them in the palette the way they were numbered. And if you look, it's like, hey, we've got two greens. If you look at that over there, and then we have a darker green. And then we've got this, like they mix it up. So like, don't forget, because if this was like in light to dark order, I might have forgotten. I feel like it sets me up for success to be like, hey, you use this light green over here. I'm right next to it. Don't forget me. Okay, this is exciting. I've started mixing the red and the purple together. I'm sorry, the red and the purple together, and I'll throw in a little bit of blue, and I'm enjoying the zhuzh. Zhuzh is good. Especially for those of you that are acrylic painters and maybe you've not played in watercolor as much, like myself. I feel like the zhuzh is what we're all about. This is what we do in our art journals. This is what we do when we paint. We splatter, we drip, we zhuzh. I need to stop saying that word because you're all going to have like a drinking game at the end of this to be like every time she says zhuzh, take a drink. So that's the last time. Anyway, again, I'm keeping with this kind of warm focal point on the right and this cooler focal point on the left. And I don't really want them to be a spread. That's why I taped the middle, because I always feel like that crease in the middle kind of screws with me a little bit. And especially the orientation of this like linear horizontal. So I'm like, these are two paintings sitting side by side. They can be similar, but they don't have to be exactly the same. They're like siblings. They're like siblings. And so that tape in the middle kind of helps me to not have to work together on them. So this mud that I'm making over here, it couldn't make me any happier. Like, there is something happy. I know probably a traditional watercolor artist is looking at this and they're freaking out and I'm probably causing them an anxiety attack. But whatever is causing them the anxiety attack is causing me to celebrate and dance. Oh, yes, please. Put some more magenta into that green because that's making me happy. Right? Oh my goodness. So happy. So happy. So, in part of sharing this with you, it's really less about like, let me teach you how to make a watercolor, because clearly I'm the last person that should be teaching anybody to watercolor. But it's more about the freedom. I've always been a believer in do what makes you happy creatively. This expression shouldn't be held back. Make a mess. Hate what you do. Lock yourself in a room and just make the ugliest stuff you can ever do. And just appreciate that you took the time to play. You played with product, which is exciting because I'm really feeling that watercolor is going to make a stronger impact on what I do moving forward. Maybe I'll even make it part of my artistic kind of repertoire for 2022. This is an exciting idea. This is what I'm going to explore. This makes me happy. But also just to embrace the destruction. And this is where the destruction comes in. Those of you that have taken my Art of Destruction course, or those of you on Patreon that have been with me for some of the destruction, this is what I consider the art of destruction. I've got this thing. Now let me just take line and make mark. I'm not trying to draw. I am destroying areas. I'm scribbling. God, that's empowering. Take every pencil you have in the box and just scribble. Add more highlight. Add more low light. Play with the left and right of a color palette, meaning this is a red ferny kind of thing and I'm pulling out oranges and yellows and purples and pinks and just playing with that. That is the freedom. And I will promise you, I can make this promise to you, whether you like this piece or not is inconsequential, but you will make a mark. I always make a mark that I'm like, oh my God, yes. Even if it's 50,000 marks and I only like one of those marks is going to be life-changing. And certainly every time I put turquoise into things, it makes me giddy. It makes my loins tingle. So that's what the power of this play is. Every artist, no matter what, level of expertise they're at, needs to play. The beginner usually has it made because they play with such a freedom, and the longer we're in the game, the less we're able to accept the mistakes. And that's more reason for you to play, to scribble, to mark, to take out a colored pencil that doesn't erase and just scribble on there. I even try some things as I'm working through this with white pen. Didn't go well. You'll see me try it on here, but because I think I have the waxy crayon on there, it's just like, absolutely not today, Donna, but thanks for playing along. But you've got to try things that fail. You can see my pencil sharpener. I'll also put a link to this on Patreon. So again, if you're watching this on YouTube, come to my Patreon and you can see this total supplies list. But do you see the points that it gets? This is probably the best thing I've ever bought. It is this perfectly Sharpie sharp pencil sharpener, and I'm sure that's clearly not the way to describe it, but it makes this incredibly sharp big point, and I love it. Helps me with my mark making, as long as I don't push too hard. So if you're a hard pusher, it might not work. But look at how many Prismacolor color pencils I have out there. I'm like, yes, how many colors is too much? That is a stupid question. There is never too much color. It's all good. And I'm playing with value. If you look at those pencils, I've got light blue and dark blue and medium blue and dark orange and light orange and yellows and pinks and reds. Oh my. And it's exciting. Because how exciting is it to use all the crayons in the box? I mean, really, that is the best day ever. So I'm playing here with the contradiction, with the contrast of value and weight. I've got this heavier perceiving weight in the watercolor, which is funny because watercolor doesn't seem heavy at all. And then I've got this lighter weight in this line work, this line of the Prismacolors mark making on there. And this is what I love. This is what I want to find. This is the where mixed media and Donna Downey meet, and freedom to play. And I really, like, I probably could have stopped now because I love it, but I just can't stop. You know, when you get in that whole thing and you're like, yes, more. And I wanted to lighten up some areas. So again, we're playing with values. So I figure if I go in and lighten up, because I always say, those of you who have taken any of my classes, you know, make your darks darker and your lights lighter. And that kind of extends the depth of your value. If you have a lot of lights and a lot of darks and everything in between, it just makes it a better cohesive piece of work. And so now I'm like, let me see can I get some white pen in here? And I have like a gel ball pen. And you'll see that this is like an awesome, I can link this too. This is like the most fabulous case ever. I got it on Amazon and it just holds all my mark making tools because I always used to go into this bag of pens and pencils, and then like an hour later, I'd find what I was looking for, if I found it at all. Okay, so the first thought was to go in with a water-based Sharpie. And then I thought, that's just this journal isn't big enough for like a broad painty line. So then I go into these gel pens, and they're great, and they usually work on everything. But I've got this waxy film with the oil, with a Prismacolor, and it's just not working. It does leave a cool mark. I'm kind of happy with the residue of the mark on there, but that's not working. So I'm like, what can I do? I feel like I want mark. So I take out my gray Adirondack ink pad and some of my favorite Tim Holtz stamps from Stampers Anonymous and put them on there. They're kind of like a specimens theory. It's like a sciencey based set, and it's like figure 1, figure 2. It's got like numbers. I'm like, that's perfect for this. It kind of feels like botanical and botany. And so I use gray so it's not like in your face. I didn't want to use black. And I just stamped that on there and I felt like, okay, now it's complete. I didn't want a message. I didn't want a word. I do love numbers because they feel ambiguous. So I put that on there, but more because they felt like botany. They felt like it was, I felt like I was doing science. So again, my favorite part is peeling back this tape. And I don't think it was necessary, but there is something to this crisp line around it that maybe it's the Virgo in me, makes it feel a little bit organized, but I just like it. I do just like it. So, and I might not stick with that idea. Probably will because I'm a creature of habit, but I just like how clean and nice it works out. There's an argument either way to feel the end of the page or not, but I'm so glad that you shared this with me because I'm just so excited about learning new things, and I hope you are too. And if you are watching this on YouTube, again, join me over on Patreon. It's free to access, and you can find out all the supplies that I linked to, and as well as rewatch the video again if you want.